The knock on my door that morning didn't sound like family. It was sharp, businesslike, the kind of knock people use when they come to take something away. I opened the door and found my son, Mason, standing there with a forced smile, and his wife, Trish, clutching a folder too tightly. I could already smell deceit before they said a word. "Dad," Mason began, "we've been thinking it's time to sell the house." Just like that. No small talk. No warmth. "My name is Eldon Vance, and this house is the last piece of my soul. I built it with my late wife, Helen, 42 years ago. We designed every beam ourselves. I handled the structure. She chose the heart. Every corner has her fingerprints. The kitchen where she sang to the radio. The oak window where we used to sip coffee and watch the sunrise. After she died, I stopped building for other people. But this house, our house, I kept repairing, polishing, preserving. It wasn't just a place to live. It was the museum of our love. And now my own son wanted to sell it like a used car." I looked at Mason and Trish, both dressed too well for a visit. Trish avoided my eyes, flipping through her papers like she was presenting to a client. Mason spoke faster than usual, trying to sound caring, but his tone slipped into impatience every few words. "Dad, you're getting older. You shouldn't be living out here all alone. We found a great apartment downtown, elevator, doorman, everything." I knew exactly what everything meant, everything except dignity. I let them talk. I watched how Mason's hand rested on Trish's arm when I didn't answer right away, how her lips pressed together in annoyance, how he said, "We've already spoken to a realtor." That was when I realized something much darker. They weren't asking me. They were informing me. My heart hurt, but not from age. It was the same pain I felt when I first visited Helen's grave, the pain of losing something irreplaceable. Still, I smiled. "If you think that's what's best, son," I said, my voice calm, even warm. "Maybe it's time." The relief that flashed across their faces told me everything. They believed they'd won. They thought the old man had finally given up. That night, I sat by Helen's photo on the mantel. The house was quiet except for the clock ticking, the same clock we bought on our first anniversary. "You were right, sweetheart," I whispered. "Greed always comes wearing a familiar face." Then I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder labeled the Helen Vance Foundation. It wasn't just a name. It was my last design, my final blueprint. Years ago, I rewrote the trust papers. If the house was ever transferred without my written consent, ownership would automatically pass to the foundation, not to Mason, not to Trish, not to anyone carrying my last name. They wanted to take my house away from me. They didn't know they were already walking straight into my plan. From the moment I said, "Maybe it's time," my house stopped being a home. It became a stage. Every smile I gave, every nod, every polite, "Sure, son," was part of a performance they didn't know they were watching. Within days, the vultures started circling openly. A realtor named Cynthia Ross showed up on my porch, dressed in an expensive beige suit, her smile sharp as a blade. "Mr. Vance, your son told me you're ready to make a move. This property is a gem. We'll have no trouble finding a buyer." I could see Mason standing behind her, hands in his pockets, pretending to be calm. Trish stood by the mailbox, scrolling through her phone, already bored, like my life's work was just another listing. I invited them in. I made coffee. I let Cynthia walk around with her clipboard, writing down potential upgrades, renovation needed, dated kitchen. She didn't understand that everything in that house was meant to be dated, that every scratch, every chip, every photograph told a story. Mason looked at me from the hallway. "Dad, we can fix this place up, make it look modern. Buyers love that." I smiled faintly. "You do whatever you think is best, son." They mistook my calmness for weakness. They didn't see that I was memorizing every word, every step. That night, I went into my study, my real fortress. I opened my old leather briefcase and reviewed the trust documents I'd written years ago with my attorney, a man named Caleb Price. A good friend. Loyal. Caleb and I designed something airtight. Any sale, transfer, or exchange of the property known as 112 Oak Ridge Lane shall be considered invalid unless executed with the living signature and physical presence of Eldon James Vance. And the clause didn't stop there. If an attempt was made without me, the property would automatically transfer to the Helen Vance Foundation, an entity under my control. It was elegant, legal, unbreakable. But the best traps are the ones that close after the prey walks inside willingly. So, I let them move forward. A few days later, Trish came over alone. "Dad, I brought you dinner," she said sweetly. She'd never cooked for me in her life. She placed the dish on the counter, glancing around the house as if she already owned it. "Cynthia says we might have a buyer by next week. Isn't that exciting?" I chuckled. "It's all happening fast, isn't it?" She smiled wide. "It's for the best. You'll be comfortable, safe. Mason and I will handle everything." Her eyes glimmered with satisfaction, like someone watching a plan fall neatly into place. When she left, I sat at the kitchen table and ran my hand across the old oak surface. Helen had sanded it herself. There was a small burn mark from the night she spilled candle wax, and I'd never fixed it. That scar in the wood reminded me of her imperfection, the kind that made her real. I whispered to her photo on the wall. "They think I'm leaving this house. They don't realize I'm just letting them decorate their own downfall." The next morning, I called Caleb. "Activate the clause," I said quietly. He knew what I meant. Then I poured myself another cup of black coffee, opened the curtains wide, and watched Mason's car pull into the driveway again. They were coming to celebrate, but I was already waiting for the show to begin. The for sale sign appeared on my lawn before the morning dew had even dried. Red, bold, and heartless, Cynthia Ross Realty. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, and watched Mason hammer it into the ground. He didn't even look at me through the glass. My own son, pounding a nail into the soil of my memories. Trish hovered nearby, snapping photos for the listing. "Make sure you get the porch," she said. "It's vintage. Buyers love that aesthetic." My porch. The same porch where Helen and I had spent summers watching fireflies, laughing about growing old together. Now it was a marketing feature. When Mason finally came in, sweat glistening on his forehead, he spoke like a man who'd already moved on. "Dad, we've got a serious buyer. A couple from Boston. They love the area. They're ready to close next week." I took a slow sip of coffee. "That's quick." He grinned. "That's a good thing. You'll get the money fast, and we'll help you move to that apartment I told you about. Downtown, close to us." That word, us, used to mean family. Now it meant ownership. Cynthia joined us later that afternoon, spreading out papers on the dining table. Legal documents, contract drafts, title transfer forms. I recognized every line. After all, I'd spent 40 years drafting blueprints, reading contracts, designing structures where one wrong measurement could bring a roof crashing down. "Just sign here, Mr. Vance," Cynthia said politely. I looked at the spot where she pointed. A blank line, waiting for my name. The name they believed would give them control. But the beauty of good architecture is invisible strength, what people don't see holding everything together. I took the pen. My hand trembled slightly, just enough for Mason to mistake it for age. I smiled faintly and said, "I suppose this is it then." He patted my shoulder like he was the parent now. "You're doing the right thing, Dad." So I signed. Not my full signature, just the practice one. The same faint, incomplete scribble I used when testing a new pen. Trish clapped softly. "Finally, you'll love the new place, I promise." I nodded, pretending gratitude. But inside, I felt something cold. Not sadness, not even anger. Something sharper. The peace that comes when a man accepts he's been betrayed and decides to answer without a single word of rage. That night, I opened the window in my study and breathed in the cool air. The for sale sign glowed faintly under the porch light, creaking in the wind like a taunt. Then I called Caleb again. "It's done," I said. "They've got the fake signature." He chuckled. "Perfect. The foundation documents are already in motion. Once they attempt to file the sale, the deed will automatically transfer to you as executor of Helen's fund." "Let them finish the job," I said softly. "I want them to think they've won." The next morning, Mason and Trish arrived, all smiles. Trish brought champagne. Mason carried moving boxes. "Dad, we'll help you pack some essentials. It'll be easier if we start tonight." I just smiled. "Sure, son. Whatever you think is best." They believed I'd surrendered. They didn't know the law was already working quietly behind the scenes, turning every step they took into evidence of fraud. As they packed Helen's old photo albums, I excused myself to the garden. The wind brushed through the rose bushes she planted. I knelt beside them, running my fingers through the soil. "I'm not leaving, Helen," I whispered. "I'm just letting them find out what greed really costs." And when I turned back toward the house, I saw them through the window, laughing, planning, dreaming of money they'd never touch. It was almost beautiful. The architecture of their own downfall, drawn by my steady old hand. The moving truck arrived 2 days later. Trish stood in the driveway directing the movers like a queen overseeing her servants. Mason leaned against the porch railing, pretending to look sentimental. "Feels weird, huh?" he said, glancing at the empty living room behind me. I nodded slowly. 40 years in one house. It'll take some getting used to. What I didn't tell him was that I hadn't packed a single thing of real value. The photo albums, Helen's letters, her wedding ring. All of it was already locked in a storage unit under my name across town. I only brought boxes of old coats, a few tools, and some books I no longer needed. Let them think I'd moved out. By noon, they were walking through the empty rooms, whispering excitedly to each other. "Once the deal clears, we'll finally get rid of those ugly curtains," Trish said. Mason chuckled. "Yeah, Dad never had any taste for style. We'll make it modern. Fresh. A new start." I stood quietly in the doorway, my cane resting against the wall. They were talking like the house was already theirs. But they didn't know that the moment the transfer papers hit the county clerk's office, the automatic clause in my trust would trigger, and the house would legally belong to the Helen Vance Foundation. Cynthia arrived with a man in a gray suit, the buyer from Boston, apparently. His name was Peter Ward, polite, mid-50s, and unaware that he was part of a much bigger play. "Congratulations, everyone," Cynthia said cheerfully. "We're officially closing today. Once Mr. Vance's signature is verified, we'll file the paperwork, and the funds will clear in 48 hours. Trish smiled like Christmas morning. Mason poured champagne into paper cups. They raised their glasses. "To new beginnings," Mason said. I lifted mine and met his eyes. "To truth," I replied softly. He didn't notice the edge in my tone. They toasted, laughing, hugging. I played along, every word of mine measured, every movement calculated. Years of architectural precision had trained me to build not just houses, but outcomes. When the crowd left and the last car disappeared down the road, I sat alone on the porch. The sun was sinking low, painting the house in golden light. It looked peaceful, too peaceful for what was coming. That evening, I checked my email. A message from Caleb waited in my inbox. Subject, clause activated. Body, county records updated. Property now registered under Helen Vance Foundation. You remain the legal trustee and primary occupant. Proceed as discussed. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly, and smiled for the first time in weeks. The plan was now irreversible. If Mason or Trish tried to take possession, they'd be trespassing, legally strangers in a home they thought they owned. 2 days later, they came bursting into my small rented apartment downtown. "Dad," Mason said, face red. "What the hell did you do?" I looked up from my coffee. "Morning, son. What's wrong?" He threw a document onto the table. "The county says the house isn't ours. The deed went to some damn foundation in Mom's name." I took a calm sip of coffee. "That's interesting. Maybe you should have read the fine print." Trish's voice shook. "You tricked us. You made us look like idiots." I smiled faintly. "No, Trish. You did that yourselves." Mason's jaw tightened. "You think this is funny? We were trying to help you." "Help me," I said quietly. "By selling my home out from under me? By turning my memories into your down payment?" "No, Mason. You were helping yourselves." For the first time, he didn't have an answer. He just stood there, the confident, smooth-talking son suddenly speechless in front of the father he thought he'd fooled. Trish grabbed his arm. "Let's go, Mason. This old man isn't worth it." They stormed out, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. I waited until their car disappeared, then walked to the window. Outside, the city lights flickered like quiet applause. They'd taken my house. Now it had taken them. The following week was quiet, almost too quiet. I knew Mason well enough to know he wouldn't disappear without a fight. My son didn't inherit Helen's kindness. He inherited my stubbornness. But without wisdom, stubbornness turns to self-destruction. It began with the phone calls. Cynthia Ross first, panicked, defensive, trying to make sense of the legal chaos. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice trembling, "there's a complication. The county clerk's office says the property automatically reverted to a nonprofit under your name. Your son is furious." "Let him be," I interrupted. "The law speaks louder than anger." The next day, Mason showed up at my apartment unannounced. He wasn't wearing his usual smile. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tight. "You think you won, old man," he said, voice low and shaking. "You think this makes you smart? You humiliated me. Trish is furious. Everyone thinks I stole from you." I didn't answer. I just motioned to the chair across from me. "Sit down, son." He didn't. "You could have just told me. Instead, you set me up like some kind of criminal." I looked at him. The boy I once carried on my shoulders through that same front yard he tried to sell. The same boy who used to say, "I want to build houses like you one day, Dad." "You built something all right," I said softly. "But it wasn't a house. It was greed." That broke him. His voice cracked. "You're pathetic. Living in a shoebox apartment, acting like you're clever. You lost your family for a pile of bricks." I smiled faintly. "You think the house was about bricks, Mason?" He clenched his fists, turned, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard it nearly came off the hinges. Later that night, I watched the local news. There he was, my son, giving an interview. His voice calm now, carefully rehearsed. He painted himself as the victim. "My father's not well. He's been manipulated by lawyers. He doesn't understand what he's done." I turned the TV off. People always reveal their true selves when money's on the line. The next morning, my attorney Caleb called. "You might want to sit down for this," he said. "Mason tried filing a lawsuit claiming mental incompetence, saying you're unfit to manage your estate." I chuckled. "He's desperate. Let him try." Caleb laughed quietly. "Oh, I plan to let him. We'll respond with the video evidence you signed the documents in full control. I even have the notary recording where you joked about hiding surprises in the paperwork." "Good," I said. "Let the truth do what it does best." A week later, the case was dismissed, fast. The judge's statement was clear. There is no evidence of mental incapacity. The trust stands as written. Mason didn't take it well. He showed up again, this time with fury in his eyes and a newspaper in his hand. "You made a fool of me," he shouted. "My name's ruined. Trish's family won't talk to us. Our friends are gone. Do you even care?" I looked up from my armchair, calm as ever. "I cared enough to teach you something before it was too late," I said. "You can rebuild your life, Mason, but not on someone else's foundation." He shook his head, tears forming. "You don't understand. Everything I did was to give us a better future. By erasing my past." I asked quietly, "By selling the only piece of your mother left in this world?" For a moment, he couldn't look at me. Then he turned and left without another word. That night, I sat in silence, the city noise humming below my window. I thought about Helen, how she always said, "You can't build something honest on stolen ground." Now Mason would finally learn what that meant. The next morning, a letter arrived from the bank. Apparently, Mason had used his expected inheritance as collateral for a private loan. Now that the sale was void, the lender was demanding repayment. I folded the letter and set it aside. Revenge doesn't always come with thunder or applause. Sometimes, it walks in quietly, dressed like consequence. I poured myself another cup of coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my hands. The house on Oak Ridge Lane was safe. Helen's memory was safe. And Mason, well, Mason was finally facing the truth he'd spent years avoiding. I always thought the worst sound in the world was silence, until I heard my son's voice on the phone that morning. He didn't sound angry anymore. He sounded small. "Dad," he began, his voice cracking. "Trish left." I didn't say anything. I just listened to him breathe on the other end, heavy and broken. "She took what was left in the account," he said finally. I don't blame her. The debt's bad. The bank froze our cards. The realtor's suing for breach of contract. I don't know what to do." For a moment, I almost forgot everything he'd done. I remembered the boy who used to sit beside me at the drafting table, tracing over my blueprints with crayons, saying, "One day I'll build something even bigger than you, Dad." And now that same boy was watching everything he'd built fall apart, not because of a bad market, but because of his own choices. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they fixed anything, but because I knew they finally cost him something to say. "I know you are, son," I said softly. "But some lessons don't come cheap." There was a long silence. Then he said, "Can I come home?" Home. That word hung in the air like a ghost. After a pause, I said, "You know where it is." That evening, as the sky turned purple over Oak Ridge Lane, I drove back to the house, my house. The porch light was still broken, the paint still peeling on the shutters. It looked exactly the way I left it, proud, old, unshaken. When I stepped inside, the air smelled of dust and memory. I ran my hand over Helen's photo on the mantel. "You were right again," I murmured. "They always come home when the noise dies down." An hour later, I heard tires crunching on the gravel. Mason's car. He stepped out slowly, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. No arrogance. No bravado. Just exhaustion. "I didn't think you'd actually let me in," he said quietly. I studied his face. Older than it should have been, carved by mistakes and sleepless nights. "It's still your home," I said. "But only if you remember whose home it truly is." He nodded. "Mom's." That answer was enough. I opened the door. He stepped inside, looking around like a stranger visiting a museum. His hand brushed the wall, tracing the grain of the wood. "I forgot how it smelled," he whispered. I said nothing. Some moments don't need words. We sat in the kitchen, the same spot where Helen used to serve Sunday breakfast. Mason stared at the old clock ticking on the wall. "It's still running," he said. "It's been running longer than you've been alive," I replied. "And it's never missed a beat. Not once." He smiled faintly. "Guess I could learn something from that clock." I leaned back, studying him carefully. "You already have." He looked up, confused. "You learn that everything breaks when you stop respecting what built it," I said quietly. "Marriage, family, trust. They're like houses, Mason. You can't sell the foundation and expect the walls to stand." He lowered his head, tears welling in his eyes. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I reached across the table, placing a hand over his. "Forgiveness isn't something you deserve. It's something you're given, if you're willing to rebuild." Outside, the wind rattled the porch swing Helen loved. For the first time in months, I didn't feel anger. I felt something lighter, not joy, not even peace. Just release. Before he left that night, Mason turned to me at the door. "You're keeping the house, right?" I smiled. "Of course. And one day, maybe it'll be yours, if you learn how to protect it, not sell it." He nodded slowly, the weight of meaning sinking in. When he drove away, I stood alone on the porch again. The moonlight fell across the yard, illuminating the "for sale" sign still half buried in the grass. I walked over, pulled it out of the ground, and laid it beside Helen's rose bushes. "Lesson learned," I whispered. For once, even the night seemed to agree. Months passed. The world went quiet again. The house on Oak Ridge Lane stood exactly as it always had, a stubborn monument to what time could not erase. But inside, everything was different. Mason came by every Sunday. No realtor, no Trish, no fake smiles. Just my son, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a silence that spoke louder than his words ever could. At first, our conversations were short. Weather, traffic, football. Safe topics that didn't hurt. But gradually, cracks began to open, honest ones. One afternoon, he said softly, "I took a job at a construction company. Not management, just labor. I wanted to start from the ground up this time." I looked at him, sunburnt and tired, but cleaner somehow. "Good," I said. "You'll understand what it means to build something with your hands." He smiled faintly. "I think I already do." He didn't talk much about Trish. I didn't ask. Some stories didn't need revisiting. Instead, we repaired the house together. He fixed the porch light that had flickered since Helen's last summer. I repainted the shutters while he replaced the old mailbox. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. The sound of tools was its own kind of forgiveness. One evening, after we'd finished restoring the front steps, Mason sat beside me on the porch, watching the sunset melt into gold over the trees. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think success was money, cars, respect. I chased it like it was oxygen. And now?" I asked. "Now I think success is being able to sit here without lying to myself." That hit harder than I expected. For the first time, I saw a reflection of Helen in him. That same humility that once drew me to her. I nodded slowly. "You're finally becoming your mother's son." He looked down, smiling through tears. "You think she'd forgive me?" I took a deep breath. The air smelled of cut grass and fading sunlight. "She already did. You just had to earn it." He stayed a while longer, then left quietly, promising to return next weekend. After he drove away, I walked inside, the floorboards creaking under my feet. The house felt alive again, not because it was perfect, but because it had been reclaimed with truth. That night, I sat in my study, looking through the old foundation papers. The Helen Vance Foundation was still active, small, modest, untouched. I had created it to protect the house, but maybe it could protect something more. The next morning, I called Caleb. I want to expand the foundation, I said. Scholarships for young builders, kids who want to design homes, not just sell them. He chuckled. Still teaching lessons, Eldon? Always, I replied. Weeks turned into months. Mason stayed true to his word. He never asked for money, never complained, never tried to undo what was done. He simply worked. He was rebuilding not just his life, but his soul. And every time I saw him, I remembered something Helen once told me on a rainy afternoon long ago. You can't make a man honest by punishing him. You make him honest by letting him see what his lies have cost. That was exactly what had happened. One Sunday, as he packed up his tools, Mason turned to me and said, Dad, I'm thinking of building a small house, my own. Not big, just something simple, where I can start over. I smiled. Then let me see the plans when you're ready. He hesitated. You'd help me? Of course, I said, but only if you draw it yourself. Every line, every corner, from the foundation up. He nodded. Deal. When he left, I stood in the doorway, the same one he once stormed out of months ago. Now he left not in anger, but in peace. The house was silent again, but this time the silence felt different, not empty, but full. Full of second chances, of lessons learned too late, but not too late to matter. I looked up at Helen's picture and whispered, You'd be proud of him now. Her smile in that old photo seemed to glow a little brighter in the soft light of dusk. For the first time in a long while, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't given me peace. Forgiveness had. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where everything feels ordinary until it isn't. I was repairing a loose floorboard in the hallway when my vision blurred, just for a second. Then my legs gave out. The next thing I remember was waking up in a hospital bed, the sound of machines beeping softly around me. The room smelled of disinfectant and loneliness. Mason was there, asleep in the chair beside my bed, his head resting awkwardly on his folded arms. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his clothes looked the same as the day before. When he realized I was awake, he jumped up instantly. Dad, hey, you scared the hell out of me. I managed a weak smile. I didn't mean to. Guess I just needed some attention. He tried to laugh, but his voice cracked. You passed out, Dad. They said your blood pressure was dangerously low. You could have. He couldn't finish. I looked at him. My son, once so arrogant, now terrified of losing what he'd nearly destroyed. Calm down, I said softly. I'm not leaving just yet. He sat down again, holding my hand tightly. You've got to start taking better care of yourself. I nodded. Maybe you're right. For the next few days, he barely left the hospital. He brought me food, made sure the nurses didn't forget my meds, even argued with a doctor who seemed too rushed. It reminded me of Helen, how fiercely she cared, how she could turn worry into strength. One evening, when the ward was quiet, I said, Mason, I want to talk to you about the house. He frowned. Dad, don't. No, I interrupted. Listen, I told him that I'd rewritten the foundation documents. The house would remain under the Helen Vance Foundation forever, untouchable, but alive. After my passing, it would be converted into a small architectural retreat, a place for young builders to learn, dream, and find peace. Mason's eyes welled with tears. You're turning our home into a school. I smiled faintly. Not a school, a sanctuary. I spent my life building things for others. This house was the only thing I built for love. I wanted to mean something, not just for us, but for those who still believe in creating beauty from nothing. He nodded slowly, absorbing every word. And what about me? You, I said gently, are the one who'll oversee it. The foundation will be yours to guide, not to own, but to guard. That's a harder job, but a better one. He looked down at his hands, rough from work. I don't deserve that kind of trust. Maybe not yet, I replied. But you're earning it one day at a time. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. The next morning, when the nurse came in, she found Mason asleep again beside my bed, a cup of cold coffee in his hand. I smiled weakly, remembering all the nights Helen sat like that when I caught the flu or worked too late. The circle of care had finally come full. When I was discharged, Mason insisted on driving me home. As we turned down Oak Ridge Lane, the house appeared through the trees, tall, old, and dignified as ever. The evening sun glowed against its windows like fire trapped in glass. "It's still standing," I said quietly. Mason grinned, stronger than before. We walked up the porch together. He steadied me when I stumbled on the last step. For a brief second, his hand on my arm felt exactly like mine used to on his, when he was 5 and afraid of falling. Inside, the air smelled of wood polish and time. On the wall, Helen's portrait hung in its usual place. I whispered, "Almost done, sweetheart. The house will be in good hands." Mason turned to me, eyes glistening. "You really love this place, don't you?" I nodded slowly. "No, son. I love what it stands for. This house isn't just wood and brick. It's the proof that something built with love can outlive everything that tries to destroy it." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, I slept in my own bed for the first time in weeks. The moonlight crept across the ceiling just like it used to when Helen was beside me. I closed my eyes and thought of her laugh, her touch, her dreams, and of Mason, sitting downstairs, protecting the home he once tried to sell. Revenge had built a wall between us, but forgiveness had built a bridge. I always believed you could feel the moment life starts to slow down. It isn't pain. It's quiet. A different kind of silence. One that doesn't ask for anything anymore. Autumn came early that year. The trees on Oak Ridge Lane were painted gold, their leaves falling like slow rain. The air had that smell of earth and endings. I could feel it in my bones. My body was weaker now. Simple things, climbing stairs, fixing a hinge, walking to the mailbox, had become challenges. Mason noticed, though I tried to hide it. "Dad, let me handle it," he'd say every time I tried to do something myself. And every time, I'd tell him the same thing. "I'm not dead yet, son." He'd laugh, but I could see the fear behind his smile. He came by every day now, not just Sundays. Sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to check the porch light. I didn't need help, but I let him stay, because I knew what he was really repairing wasn't the house. It was us. One evening, after he left, I sat in my study, looking at the blueprints pinned to the wall, the same ones Helen and I drew decades ago. My fingers traced her handwriting on the margins. "Add window here. More light." That's what she always wanted, more light. And that's exactly what Mason had brought back into my life. I knew I didn't have much time left, so I began writing a letter. Not for the courts. Not for the foundation. For him. "Dear Mason, if you're reading this, I've gone where your mother's been waiting. Don't be sad. I've had a long life, and it ended the way I always hoped it would, with peace in our home. When you were a boy, you once asked me why I loved building houses so much. I told you it's because they last longer than people. That was only half true. The other half is this. We build houses not to live forever, but so that love can. You made mistakes, so did I. But the measure of a man isn't the mistakes he makes. It's how he rebuilds after everything falls apart. And, son, you've rebuilt beautifully. Don't carry guilt for what happened. It was part of your making. Even the strongest beams are shaped by fire. The Helen Vance Foundation is yours now. Protect it, but don't let it trap you. Live, love, build. Find someone who believes in you the way your mother believed in me. And remember this, forgiveness is the only blueprint worth passing down. Love always. Dad." I folded the letter carefully and sealed it inside an old envelope. Then I placed it in the drawer of my desk, right beneath the picture of Helen and me standing in front of the half-built house. That night, as the rain began tapping softly against the windows, I sat by the fireplace and let the warmth soak into my skin. The crackling reminded me of the nights Helen and I used to read to each other. Simple stories, simple peace. My eyelids grew heavy, but I wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, there was no anger left in me, only gratitude. Before I went to bed, I looked out the window one last time. The porch light was still glowing, steady and bright. Mason had fixed it weeks ago, and it hadn't flickered since. I smiled. "Good work, son," I whispered. Then I turned off the lamp, lay down, and closed my eyes. The last thing I remember was Helen's laugh echoing in the quiet, and the soft creak of the floorboards, as if the house itself was breathing with me one final time. The house was silent when I walked in that morning. The kind of silence that feels alive, full, heavy, remembering. I had the keys in my hand, though I didn't need them. Dad never locked the front door, even when I used to tell him to. He'd always smile and say, "What's meant to enter will find its way in." Now I understood what he meant. It had been 3 days since he passed. Peacefully, the nurse said. No pain, no struggle, just a soft sigh, like a man finishing his final masterpiece. The funeral was small. A few neighbors, some of his old colleagues, and me. Everyone spoke about his precision, his designs, his discipline. But no one knew what I knew, that the greatest thing he ever built wasn't a house. It was forgiveness. After everyone left, I drove straight here. The driveway still curved around the maple tree he planted when I was born. The porch creaked under my feet exactly the way it used to. Inside, everything smelled like him, wood polish, tobacco, and old books. I walked into his study, where the lamp was still sitting crooked on the desk. That's when I saw it. The envelope with my name written in his careful, aging handwriting. I sat down and opened it slowly. His letter was short, simple, and perfect. By the time I finished reading, I couldn't see the words anymore. My eyes were wet, my chest tight. He forgave me, truly forgave me, and left me something far more powerful than money or property. He left me a purpose. That evening, I stood in the front yard and looked at the house. The sunset was spilling gold across the windows, and for a second, I could almost see him there, sitting on the porch with Mom, smiling at the light. The next week, I met with Caleb, Dad's attorney. He walked me through everything. The updated foundation papers, the grant applications Dad had been preparing, the letter to the city's architectural board. My father hadn't just built a home. He'd built a future. Together, we established the Helen Vance Home for Builders, a place where students could stay, learn, and create without debt or despair. The first scholarship was in his name, the Eldon Vance Legacy Award. The day the first group of young architects arrived, I watched them step onto the porch, nervous, wide-eyed, full of hope. One of them pointed at the beams above the door and said, "Whoever built this knew what they were doing." I smiled. "Yeah," I whispered. "He really did." They asked me to tell them about the man behind the design. So I told them everything, the good and the bad. How he built this house with love, how he almost lost it, how he taught me the hardest lesson there is. You can't sell what your heart built. That night, I stayed late after everyone left. The house glowed from within. Laughter, footsteps, life. For the first time in years, it was alive again. I wandered into the kitchen and found the old clock still ticking, just as it always had. Dad used to say, "It's been running longer than you've been alive." Now, it would keep running long after both of us were gone. I poured a glass of bourbon, his favorite, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was warm, and the roses he planted for Mom had started blooming again. I raised the glass toward the stars and said softly, "You did it, Dad. The house is still standing." A gentle wind passed through the yard, rustling the leaves, almost like an answer. And as I stood there under the fading light, I realized something I'd never understood before. Revenge can make people remember your anger, but forgiveness makes them remember your name. A year has passed since my father's funeral, and yet, some mornings, I still expect to see him sitting on the porch. That same quiet smile, that same cup of coffee cooling in his hand. The house on Oak Ridge Lane hasn't changed much. I kept it exactly the way he left it. The only new thing is a brass plaque beside the door that reads, "The Helen and Eldon Vance Foundation, built on love, rebuilt by forgiveness." Every time I pass it, I feel the weight of what those words mean. We've had 3 scholarship students stay here this year. Young architects and designers from small towns across the country. Kids who couldn't afford college, but who remind me so much of Dad. They spend late nights sketching, arguing about design, laughing over burnt coffee in the kitchen. Sometimes I listen from the hallway and can almost hear Dad's voice correcting their angles, praising their courage. One of them, a girl named Lila, asked me recently, "Mr. Vance, how did this place start?" I smiled and said, "It began with a mistake." She looked confused, so I told her. Not everything, but enough. How I once tried to sell this house, thinking it was just property. How my father let me hang myself with my own greed, only to save me from the fall. She listened in silence, wide-eyed. When I finished, she said quietly, "So the foundation isn't just about building homes. It's about rebuilding people." I nodded. Exactly. That night, after the students went to bed, I walked through the house alone. Every step echoed against the old wood floors. I paused at the study door. Dad's chair still faced the window, just as he'd left it. A layer of dust covered the desk, but his blueprints were still pinned to the wall. Neat, perfect, timeless. I sat down and opened the bottom drawer. The smell of tobacco and old paper drifted up, and for a moment, it felt like he was there again. That's when I found another envelope I hadn't seen before. No name, no seal, just one line written in his handwriting. If you're still searching, look outside. I carried it to the porch, confused. The night was cool and quiet, the kind of silence Dad used to love. I looked around, nothing but trees and the soft hum of crickets. Then my eyes caught something near the garden. There, half hidden behind the rose bushes, stood a small stone I'd never noticed before. I brushed away the dirt, revealing an inscription carved deep and clean. Home isn't a place you build. It's the people who stay. My knees gave out, and I sat right there in the grass. The night air smelled like earth and memory. For a long time, I just stared at the words, tears slipping silently down my face. That was Dad's final lesson. Not written in a contract or a letter, but carved in stone, where time couldn't erase it. Now, whenever I feel lost, I sit on that porch, look out at the garden, and whisper, "I'm still here, Dad." And in those quiet moments, I swear I can feel him nearby. The creak of a floorboard, the soft flicker of the porch light, the scent of his cologne carried by the wind. The foundation has grown. Donations come in from people who never even met him. They read his story online, hear about the man who outsmarted greed with patience and turned revenge into redemption. Every time a new student walks through that door, I tell them the same thing. This isn't a house. It's proof that forgiveness can be built from broken bricks. And sometimes, when the sun sets just right, the golden light hits the windows like fire trapped in glass, just like the day we buried him. I pour a small glass of bourbon, just the way he liked it, and raise it to the sky. "Here's to you, Dad," I whisper. "You taught me how to build more than walls. You taught me how to build a life." The wind moves through the trees like an answer, soft, steady, familiar. I smile, take a slow sip, and let the warmth fill my chest. The porch light flickers once, then steadies again. And for the first time in a long, long while, I don't feel alone. 5 years have passed since my father's last sunrise. And still, not a day goes by that I don't hear his voice somewhere inside these walls. The Helen and Eldon Vance Foundation has grown beyond anything I imagined. What started as one house and a promise has turned into a network of workshops, scholarships, and mentorships for hundreds of young architects across the country. Every blueprint, every brick, every heart that walks through our doors carries a piece of him. But I still live here, in the house where everything began and almost ended. I tried leaving once, moving closer to the city for convenience, but I couldn't do it. Every apartment I stepped into felt hollow. Too clean, too new. This old house, with its creaks and imperfections, still breathes like it knows me better than I know myself. On quiet mornings, I sit on the porch with a cup of black coffee, the way Dad liked it. The same mug, chipped on one side. The air still smells like pine and rain. The porch swing moves gently in the wind, and sometimes I imagine him sitting there, looking at me with that same knowing smile, the one that said everything without words. A few months ago, one of our students, a boy named Ethan, found an old audio cassette in the study while cleaning. He brought it to me, curious. It was labeled in Dad's handwriting, for later. We had to borrow an old tape player from a neighbor just to listen to it. When I pressed play, his voice filled the room, low, calm, familiar. "If you're hearing this, it means time has finally done its job. Don't be sad. I left long ago, one small piece at a time, into every beam and nail of this house. Mason, if you're still there, remember that we build to protect, not to possess. And if someone comes to you someday, desperate to sell what they love, stop them. Teach them. Show them that love is not currency, it's foundation. The rest will take care of itself." His voice faded with a faint chuckle. Then silence. That was all. Just 40 seconds. But those words hit me harder than anything he'd ever said in person. Because I finally understood, he never wanted revenge. He wanted me to learn the architecture of the heart. Since then, I've made it a rule here. No student is allowed to build without first answering one question. Who are you building for? If they can't answer, they don't start. It's funny. The ones who come here thinking about money or fame always leave changed. They end up designing shelters, homes for families, community centers, things that matter. Dad would have been proud. This evening, I walked out to the garden to check the rose bushes. They bloom every spring now, brighter than before. The plaque at their base reads, Helen's Garden, where love outlives anger. I sat down on the bench nearby and watched the sun dip low behind the trees. The light hit the house just right, making the windows burn with gold, the same way they did on the day Dad passed. A soft wind brushed through the garden. For a moment, I could almost hear two voices, his and Mom's, whispering together. Not haunting, not sad, just present. I took a deep breath. I kept it safe, I said quietly. Just like you wanted. The air moved again, and I swear the porch swing shifted on its own, creaking softly. A familiar rhythm, like an old heartbeat still echoing through time. Inside, the old clock ticked in the kitchen. It had never stopped. I smiled. Still running, huh? I whispered. Guess so am I. Later that night, as I walked upstairs, I noticed something I'd never seen before. Faint writing carved into the back of the stair rail. It must have been there for decades, worn almost smooth by time. I knelt down and traced the letters with my fingers. For Mason, so you'll always find your way home. I closed my eyes and felt tears roll down, not from grief anymore, but from gratitude. Because I finally understood, the house wasn't my inheritance. It was my compass. Now, whenever students or visitors ask me how this all began, I tell them. It started with betrayal. It ended with love. And everything in between was the story of a man who knew how to build forever. Then I smile, lift my coffee cup toward the light, and whisper, Here's to you, Dad. The porch light flickers once, steady as ever. And the house, our house, glows quietly in the dark, still watching over me like it always did. Because some homes don't just shelter you. They keep your soul.